Hi everyone, this is Gerard, author of Good Decisions, Better Outcomes, a simple 5-step process to help you make important and difficult decisions with confidence and clarity. So, this is my first official podcast, and this is where I'm going to introduce my book to you in case you haven't purchased the book yet. And I open up the book with a preface as why I wrote this book. And believe it or not, despite all my education and all the learning I did in making decisions, I ended up making a bad decision with a purchase of a vehicle. Maybe not a bad decision, but a decision that cost me quite a bit of money in the end. And that's one of the main reasons why I wrote the book. I want to pass on to you some of the mistakes that I made so that you can't repeat the mistakes that I did. After the preface, I go into the introduction. The introduction is just an outline of the entire book. I go from the beginning to the end with very short examples to kind of give you a flavor for what you're about to read. And my book is divided into 6 parts. Part 1 is the trifecta influencers. Part 2 is the 3-tier philosophy. Part 3 is the decisions to consider and make. Part 4 is getting to your final objective. Part 5 is applying the P2 mode. And Part 6, your most effective decision. So in Part 1, I talk about the trifecta influencers. So what are the trifecta influencers? Well, it's a term I coined for the way we think in terms of our needs, wants, and emotions. And the trifecta influencers is the beginning of understanding how we make decisions. It's the decision-making process. And what are your needs versus what are your wants, and how do your emotions come into play? The second part of the book is the 3-tier philosophy. So the 3-tier philosophy, again, the 3-tier philosophy is another term I came up with just to help me keep things in check and make it easier to read, consists of how we think, systems thinking, and long-term thinking. And when I talk about how we think, I'm going to be talking about systems 1 and systems 2 thinking. This was coined by Dr. Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winner in economics. And in brief, systems 1 thinking is innate. It's fast and it's quick. Systems 2 is slow and methodical and really requires us to think. After that, I go into systems thinking, what is meant by systems thinking, and then long-term thinking. Part 3 is decisions to consider and make. And in here, I talk about the type of decisions we make from easy to hardest. I also describe that some decisions that may be easy to us may be difficult for others, and vice versa. So after we've understand the trifecta influencers and the 3-tier philosophy and understand a little bit more of some of the decisions that we make between easy and hard, I get into part 4, which is getting to your final objective. And your final objective is based on your true needs. So in this chapter, I talk about determining your true needs, talk about focusing on your critical thinking, identifying your objectives, and then clarify and validate your objectives to get to your final objective. And what I mean by that is, for the most part, we all have an idea of what we need. But when you go through this exercise, it'll flush out to make sure what you believe you need is truly what you need, so that if that is the case, it becomes your objective. In part 5, I get to some of the crux of this entire framework, and that's applying the P2 method. And the P2 method is something I developed over years and years of experience, education, and application. And the P2 mode is a method to help you think long-term, to think in systems, and to stay focused. Does that sound familiar? Yes, it's going back to the 3-tier philosophy. And the P2 mode stands for parts, process, hence P2, maintenance costs, operational costs, disposal, which is your exit strategy, and emotions. And emotions is an important part of our decision-making process. And once you read the book, you'll understand why we need to have emotions in there. If we don't have them in there, we may regret the decision we make. And finally, I get into part 6, which is your most effective decision. And here, what we do is we take everything we've learned and apply to this mathematical model. And don't be afraid. I go through step by step on how to use this model so that in the end you could calculate what is your best alternative. And it's a very straightforward process, and it'll help you make a better decision that also includes your emotions. One thing we cannot leave out in our decision-making process is our emotions. And in the book, I talk about that and how other great minds have talked about emotions being part of the decision-making process. In the end, I have acknowledgments, I have a little bit about myself, I have a glossary of terms in case you get lost somewhere in some of the acronyms or terms that I use. I also have Appendix A, which is comments about some questions posed earlier in the chapter. And then I have Appendix B, which is the P2 mode cheat sheet. So you could actually print this out and keep it with you, learn from it, and just apply to everyday life. And then in Appendix C, I have the framework's hierarchy and steps. This is really useful because once you've read the book, you can say, well, there was quite a bit of information there, but with this framework, this hierarchy framework that I have in Appendix C, you'll say, oh, yes, I remember this, I remember this. And then the last thing I have is Appendix D, which is a general view of the framework for choosing a vehicle. Now, in my book, I talk about, throughout the book, choosing a vehicle. And I give you a little glimpse here and there of how the whole process works. But if you want to see the whole thing, in the end, go to Appendix D, and that'll show you the framework that I use throughout the book to choose the vehicle. Well, that's all I have now. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found this very informative. Again, my name is Gerard Ibarra, author of Good Decisions, Better Outcomes, a simple 5-step process to help you make important, difficult decisions with confidence and clarity. Have a great day.